Okay, everyone, this is Dan Winter, and this is a continuation of yesterday's lecture on longitudinal waves, sometimes called scalar or torsional, mechanism of immortality, the only truly distributable wave, and the only way for action at a distance. David? Sorry. Yeah. So today we're going to talk about the longitudinal wave theory in the context of DNA evolution versus extraterrestrial history of DNA. And we have some experts in the room, actually, on extraterrestrial history. I don't know if Med is here. Oh, Med is coming in right now, so it's all good.
You should hear this.
Yes. Med, we just introduced you. You have just been introduced. Extraterrestrial history expert right there. So we're going to present some stories to try to make some sense. For example, when others, including extraterrestrials, say, well, you humans are only 3D and we're 5D and therefore we're better than you, we think that might be a little bit insulting, actually. And electrical engineers know better. You know, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so being an electrical engineer, every problem is electrical. And that includes lovemaking. But we won't go there now. So,
That's the night.
yes. Where we
Electrochemical.
yes. Where we left this yesterday, the piece we didn't finish yesterday. Remember yesterday we were talking about longitudinal waves and we said it's the only way to understand action at a distance. Remember we said that action at a distance was considered spooky by Einstein, but actually now if you understand what's called longitudinal interferometry, you can then understand stargates and portals and transport and action at a distance and plasma containment and the fun stuff. But we need to understand how action at a distance is possible. So that's where we start today's conversation, and we'll end with E.T. phone home. Okay. So this is remember from yesterday, the transverse wave is all the conventional radios use only the up and down, the lower transverse wave. Whereas the compressional wave, longitudinal, sometimes called scalar or torsional, is incorrectly called scalar or torsional. We think longitudinal EMF is the correct term. The Russians called it torsional merely because if you want to make a longitudinal wave as an RF antenna, you make a spiral on a cone. So that's how you launch a longitudinal wave, hence you induce that rotation. But the key information is that rotation must be exerted as the famous spiral on the cone. There's a spiral on the cone. So that's yesterday. Okay. But then I said, and with longitudinal waves, you can do action at a distance, which means you could contain heat at a distance. This is the holy grail of fusion research. The only problem with fusion research is, how do we contain the heat? We don't know how. It's because our scientists haven't looked at longitudinal interferometry that they don't know how, and we're here to teach them. Thank you very much. So, this also then will explain how stargates and portals will work in the advanced part of this lecture. So when the longitudinal waves is launched, remember it went down the spiral on the cone and it went through the speed of light at the Planck threshold and turned from up and down transverse to compressional longitudinal. And remember, conventional electromagnetics has very little knowledge of how to either send or receive longitudinal electromagnetics. It's little understood. The longitudinal RF engineers after World War II went from Germany to Russia. So America always brags, we got the German rocket scientists. What they don't know is they didn't even get the important people. Hello? And you know how the Germans figured out? Because they had to bounce a radar wave off a submarine, non-destructively. Okay? And that's called phase conjugation, by the way. And the secret is in the paint. Which has the right dielectric constant. Which is the nature of the material at the middle. Here. So now we're visualizing the longitudinal waves are launched, and where they again cross at a distance. You remember those pictures of Tesla doing energy without wires and the light bulbs are all over the lawn and you're waiting for the light bulbs to light up? Everybody says, well, we could have had free energy if they hadn't killed Tesla too soon. Well, we learned for ourselves the only actual distribution of energy without wires is this. It's right here. It's the solution to charging your iPad without wires accurately as well, by the way. So, when the longitudinal waves, remember, the longitudinal waves is trucking along there, it's a compressional wave, and it'll go through about anything transparently. For example, a Faraday cage, as we mentioned yesterday. But when they cross again at a distance, the nodes at which they intersect, if there's a material there, which is a high dielectric material, meaning efficient capacitance, like a phase conjugate mirror, we're going to talk about that, or like a stargate or portal, what that allows to happen is it resets up a matrix condition within which the vortex cone geometry is again enacted, just like a mirror image of that vortex cone. So if you set up the vortex cones in a matrix, in a square array, then the longitudinal waves come in, the compressional waves, and they go down the pine cone again. But this time, they're converted from compressional back to transverse. And the transverse wave reconstituted there at the cross point node can non-destructively contain heat at a distance. The very practical example is, remember I mentioned yesterday when Ingo Swann so frequently heated that thermistor, the flame, with his mind at a distance through a Faraday cage. Okay, there's the proof. How did that happen? Right here. It's not a mystery. Longitudinal interferometry. Now that will introduce us to stargates and portals and how the ET travels and that sort of thing. One friendly example we're going to give of that is when, you see, when you enter that compression array where a large number of longitudinal waves converge, the compression, if it's non-destructive, will produce acceleration coherently at the center. Literally, beam me up, Scotty. Now, remember that compression, that it's required to accelerate your plasma bubble. And that's what literally what's happening. Your plasmoid bubble is being imploded and accelerated. And I give you a very practical example to understand that. I don't know if you ever read the Billy Myers literature, his experience with Semjase in the ETs, Ned knows all about, at Lake Maggiore, I think it was. I was there, well, I was in the neighborhood. And Semjase visited us in Fred Bell's living room, who wrote a book about it. I mean, I have a little experience too, Ned, just a little, but she has more. So anyway, normally they would beam Billy Myers up on the ship, okay? But one day he arrived to be beamed up and he was upset. He was emotionally a mess that day, and they couldn't beam him up the normal way. So they had to beam him up in a way that was very painful for him, actually. He reported this story in quite some detail. And it's exactly, and I mean exactly, a metaphor for why you can't die well if you're upset. Same physics, okay? Because if your aura is not phase coherent, it cannot be compressed. In practical, compressed and accelerated. In practical terms, that means when you're laying there getting ready to die, say, who am I angry at and which of my memories are not shareable? And when you can say to yourself honestly, all my memories are shareable, I am a shareable wave, then you're ready. And you see my hair standing up? That felt good, actually. So the point is that that's what makes you compressible and makes your aura able to be accelerated into the coherent longitudinal array grid called Hey Ave, where the breath of charge takes flight heaven, or planes of Charon, which Lawrence Gardner correctly analyzed the almost infinite electron shell unpacking around monoatomic materials like monoatomic gold Ormes. The phase conjugate dielectric Ormes electron shells unpack almost infinitely, called the planes of Charon, which happens to be the Hebrew name for heaven. Perfected charge distribution. Get it? So if you... Thank you. We're in France, excuse me. The Champs-Élysées, precisely. The Elysian Fields, you see. So the French name for it is, thank you very much, right on. So the field, Champs-Élysées, illusion, you know. So the ability to enter that perfected charge distribution is the physics, and I do mean the physics, which is teachable, because now you can design a hospital for dying as a good electrical engineer, and you can design a bed in which to die, and you can design a sacred burial ground with correct electrical engineering if you understand longitudinal interferometry. So we're introducing the idea of portal or stargate. The other metaphor I wanted to use, I even have some notes for this lecture, was Uru Asa LM, okay, Jerusalem. Uru, we know, means ancient dragon one, the ancient dragon blood, the high Draco. Asa means the queen of, or the royal. And remember, these royals were all female dominated. Uru, Asa. El, the place of the phase shift. The Elohim. The El is the one who can translate their vorticity, and that's the El, right there. The L is where your inertia gets translated from transverse to longitudinal, and then you have made the L, or phase shift. And you are an Uru Asa LM, Jerusalem, okay? And also the sense of the Ba from the Ka, where the Ka is transverse and the Ba is longitudinal. And that's, the Egyptians described a seed coming from the husk. So it's literally squeezed out like a seed. And that's what can survive death if it's coherent enough. And that's the electrical engineering lesson, which is the subject of today. And classically, the access to the Uru Asa LM, the Stargate, remember the movie Stargate, which Rick Hasson, my partner at Transicom Gaiam, which is now Gaiam Television. I worked with Jay Widener there at Gaiam and designed the media lab for them, actually. And Rick Hasson was the producer of Stargate, the movie. And the glyphs, the symbols used in the movie Stargate, and I'll dig out the slide later, were actually the Ophanim Enochian alphabet, which we now know why, because they're the shadows of this spiral on this torus in hypercube symmetry. Hypercube meaning cube in a dodeca, implosive symmetry. So that's why those letters from Ophanim Enochian, which John Dee read, the plasma in the phase conjugate mirror, John Dee's famous obsidian mirror. We're going to talk about the Olmec phase conjugate mirror, and we're going to talk about Nostradamus' phase conjugate mirror. So those plasma domains arranged in that array became the movie Stargate for very good physics. And some of our friends from Montauk complained after the movie Stargate came out, which was they stole our script. I was there, actually. But anyway. Okay, so now what I was supposed to do at this point in the lecture was actually show you the image from the Olmec mirror, because we want to talk a little bit more about phase conjugate mirrors. And if I have the right slideshow here. So this is the slideshow I produced for the optometrists about why phase conjugation is the cause of sharpened vision. And in that lecture you can see in the blog at therify.net. You see that international lecture I did for the optometrists, that phase conjugation is the cause of perception. Now, right now we're talking about phase conjugation as the cause of advanced perception, clairvoyance, what Nostradamus and John Dee and the Olmecs did. So they were all very good at polishing this obsidian mirror. Now, why did they need to polish that obsidian mirror? Remember, this is the Olmecs who were willing to walk 60 miles to get the right kind of stone for their ancestor Dolmen. Now we actually know the electrical engineering of that. For example, when Vincent was in Egypt and he looked at Sekhmet's statue and the plasma eyes lit up and glowed red and she was there. Okay? She could only inhabit that statue if it had the correct electrical qualities, which in short, it relates to high dielectric constant. I keep talking about that. Dielectric is simply a measurement of when you put an insulator between the plates of capacitor and you ring it like a bell with a hammer called voltage, and you measure how long does it ring. And if it rings forever, which is a high dielectric constant, then you have a zero-point energy device. And it turns out that if a capacitor has a high enough dielectric constant, it is by definition a zero-point energy vacuum coherence source of power from the vacuum, literally. Okay, so in other words, it's the same story. The Sufi who could make the perfect echo, remember Meetings with Remarkable Men about Gurdjieff? So the one who could make the perfect echo was the saint, because that's exactly what you need to do at the time of death. Anyway, so the high dielectric constant material allows the plasma entity of your ancestors' ghosts, which we now know is a plasmoid. We now know the physics of why. We know where a ghost goes after death. We know when they go, why they go, and we know what they're looking for. And it's all very simple electrical engineering, actually. They're looking for the place of power in the room, which is implosive enough charge compression where they can go through that Stargate. Okay? So that if your inertia is not delivered through the implosive compression, you can't go through the Stargate. So actually, we didn't finish the slides of the geometry of successful death yesterday. Maybe we'll do that quickly here, just after this slide. But the point is, the reason you need the phase conjugate mirror is one good way of talking to your ancestors. Every Aboriginal tribe knew that the most important thing you could be doing was making phone calls to ancestors. And then Korotkov followed the Kogi to where they made phone calls to ancestors. He measured fractality of the air and proved that the charge distribution efficiency, which we call sacred space, is simply where you can get a perfect electrical echo, defines the only place you can make phone calls to ancestors, and it's been measured. So this is a telephone grid for druids, as it were, right? So the same applies to what you're looking at in the phase conjugate mirror. Other examples of this, phase conjugate mirror as a telephone device for ancestral memory would be, I think Nostradamus was gifted after he helped someone in Italy, and they taught him how to coat the black mirror surface on the bottom of his cup of scrying water, which was the turning point for Nostradamus. Actually, to make a phase conjugate mirror. Do you know what scrying means? Scrying is you do the same thing that you do if you want to see auras. You go for a depth perception such that the depth of field in the photography of your eye gets broad. So you relax your eye almost to the point where it's blurred. So instead of a very shallow depth of field, as any cameraman would know, you have a very deep depth of field. If the relaxation is sufficient, you'll begin to see the aura, actually. And of course, if there's a bias voltage present, sometimes called GDV or Kirlian or gas discharge visualization, another excellent example of high bias voltage to deliver aura vision is Therify. Actually, we have many reports of aura vision and clairvoyance are catalyzed. And my mother was a bit of a clairvoyance and became a famous artist, actually, as a direct result, actually, in the Templar bloodline, I think, but that's another story. So another example of the phase conjugate mirror story is John Dee and Kelly and Dee's famous scrying stone called the Show Stone, S-H-E-W, wherein they spent years looking at the shadows of plasmoids, which then became the Ophanim-Enochian alphabet, which connections to Greek, and the movie Stargate. And we have a whole website about the Ophanim-Enochian. That's kind of another story, goldenmean.info/Ophanim. But what they saw in there was the shadows of plasma donuts at the right symmetry angle, the index of which, later when the Ophanim-Enochian famous alphabet was indexed, it proved to be a hypercube again. So that's what they saw in that phase conjugate mirror, the Show Stone of John Dee and Kelly. So now we promised just a short tour through short tour through death. Okay, this is a short tour of death. This is you know how who wrote the book A Short History of Time? Wasn't that right? So this is a short history of death. So here's where Korotkov is measuring where the ghost goes and what it does after death. It looks for the place of power in the room because charge implosion is what delivers ghosts, and that's why Therify, we have many reports, is very good at helping deliver ghosts, actually. Medrick may speak about that when he speaks here from the Therify Perpignan Center tomorrow. So Korotkov measured this, and what he used cadavers and found, a short summary is, if the death is peaceful and the collapse of the aura of the fingertips was an indicator of when your aura was leaving your body. You do a graph of that, and indeed, if the death was peaceful, as the Tibetans apparently well knew, the major departure of the aura is 10 and 36 hours after death. But again, a peaceful death only. And this was the book Light After Life. Korotkov has done a lot of good work. And then we've spoken about this hundreds of times. This is just for the people who haven't been with us through the years. But the Heinrich Clouvet form constants, if you interview hundreds of people who have had near-death experiences, or LSD experiences, or bliss experiences, and you say, you know, what was the sequence of symmetry you saw? And the summary of years of research by Heinrich Clouvet was clear. First they saw a lattice, then a cobweb, and a tunnel, and then a spiral, and then it would repeat. And later, our wonderful friend Danny Schreiber, who died recently of aggressive leukemia, came back after death with his lucid dreaming partner. We want to thank Fiona, and clearly reported that this was correct, but also that there was a distinct low-frequency phonon heterodyne, a certain beat note, literally the sound of implosion, accompanied this. Now we now know exactly why successful death is a black hole, and that's what this little sequence is about, that there's the black hole of death. So you know that Raymond Moody famously, and again we've spoken about this many times, but the Raymond Moody documented with many surgeons that the death visions are electrically contagious. And now we know exactly why, and I recommend Ray Moody highly. I love the guy. He's very sweet. I've lectured with him many times in Italy. So, but the physics of understanding electrical engineering is new, and that's from me, and that is the necessary conditions for death are a charged black hole. Identical with birth. A good birth will have all these. You talk to the ladies who have bliss at birth, same story, really. And the physics of rebirthing, same story. So anyway, I was the first one, I think, to work out why that's what you see for successful death. You know, if you're driving to Paris, get a map. If you're dying, there's a map. So, in fact, the short, again, we could go through this detail, but the short summary is the DNA braid recursion goes from lattice, tetracube shadow, to cobweb, to tunnel, to spiral, and then the bigger donut rotates again. And you're adding an axis of spin symmetry of charge each time, and another harmonic in the power spectra, and you're literally, that is the definition of going to the next dimension. Okay? We're going to talk a great deal about that next. So this is why you see lattice, cobweb, tunnel, spiral when you die, is because your DNA needs to do that in order to implode. And without implosion, there's no successful death. This was the climax slide for the lecture on vision, basically. Again, charge implosion. So this is the idea about that charge implosion and phase conjugation explain death. And I mentioned Billy Meyer, I mentioned Beam Me Up. Oh yes, so the other thing I was supposed to mention here, I'm using my notes now, was we want to talk about something called the left behind. Now, if you're a Bible-thumping religious fundamentalist, you have a famous series of books called The Left Behind. And the left behind are the people who didn't make it through the rapture. And they are very clear that during the rapture, guns will melt. And I'm here to explain to you the physics of why they're right. Okay? The left behind are also those who can't go through death successfully, by the way, and can't go through bliss successfully, and can't go through wormholes successfully, can't implode successfully. You get the flavor. That's the left behind. They're not quite into the physics yet, but we're here to help them too. But anyway, they've always agreed that the guns will melt. And I'm going to explain to you why they're right. Because material that does not have a high dielectric constant, like steel and metal buildings and guns, actually present more charge resistance during charge implosion. So when plasma gets spin dense, the first thing to melt is your guns. A practical example, and you can test this for yourself. You take the implosive Brown's gas, hydrogen, monatomic hydrogen burning gas torch, and it'll cut through steel just fine, but it won't cut your hand. Think about that for a minute. Once you understand that, then you understand why guns are going to melt during the rapture, okay? So now we're getting close to talking about what Soaru, who is one of the more famous Platonists, meant by says, well, when you guys get to 5D, then you're worth talking to. Well, actually what she meant was the plasma spin density that results from the superposed axes of spin, called going to the next dimension. And the primary part of this lecture now is the pictures, to make that fun, which is how that happens in DNA in response to what Glenn Ryan measured. Okay, so Glenn and I were kind of together that day when I was telling Roland McCready, I call that coherence, and Roland was saying, no. It was so funny. And so I think this is from Glenn Ryan on top, isn't it, Glenn? Wasn't it?
Yeah.
That looks familiar a little bit?
Yeah.
Could be, yeah, there it is. Okay. So I taught HeartMath Institute how to do this, which is take a power spectra of the EKG during love. And you get these gorgeous harmonic gas. Note that this particular one is from 0 to about 40 hertz, 0 to 30 hertz, and I taught them that spectrum. where to look. I taught them where to look. And so basically, the moment you're sending love, the harmonics in your EKG get very ordered. That should look familiar in the frequency signature power spectra Fourier transform. It is a caduceus-looking cascade. And you measure that coherence now to measure pure intention. It's a functional lie detector, excellent for teaching Tantra by measurement. And one of the largest banks in Australia bought the system to teach their bank managers empathy by measurement. That's ANZ Bank in Melbourne. You can go to there. Bought it from me. I did the consult, okay? And so this is my discovery. And now today it's called realheartcoherence.com. Excellent for measuring love, make, I mean Tantra, because we can measure with Aura's phase lock. And Patrick will be demonstrating that tomorrow, right? Fun toys. And whoever has the most love, love making, fun with the device gets a free ear clip. I brought some extra ones.
You mean in general it's the most coherent?
Well, actually, it's the one who looks prettiest on the marketing video, really, but whatever. No, but now what Glenn was measuring here, I think, Glenn, you measured the difference in the presence of the enzyme response.
DNA, that's DNA,
Yeah.
absorption at 270 nanometers.
Okay.
But before I was measuring the change in that absorption over time as it rewinds, but this is just a snap moment measurement before and after treatment.
Right, and so that difference, but that was related in your hypothesis to braid density, the ability to twist and braid.
That was your hypothesis. I don't use the word braiding because that's not in the molecular biology vocabulary.
But that absorption, I did believe, and I still believe, is related to braid coherence.
That's your
Yeah,
hypothesis.
yeah,
That's
right,
great.
which is phase coherence, and massive coherence. And you see, that's related to. This is the graph from Irving Dardick Making Waves, who proved in heart rate variability that the more harmonics present in your heart, the more you have an immune system. So when they check your HRV for harmonic inclusiveness, if there's one harmonics, you're toast. If you have infinite cascade of harmonics, you're young and healthy. Okay, that's the fastest way to find out if you have an immune system. And the way that's graphed, notice it looks like a fractal, is the long wave fits on the short wave. And for that harmonic inclusiveness to occur in your heart, you don't get that kind of harmonics unless you're feeling emotional coherence. So now we want to discuss how that braiding happens and why that is a perfect model for higher dimensional physics. In fact, it is my belief that DNA itself is the biological mechanism of the maximum possible number of dimensions that can exist functionally. And that starts what was called 12 strands, is actually the 12th recursive braid on the braid on the braid. Thread, string, rope, fat rope. The fat rope has an envelope that never existed until you got to the short wave, right? So that was when the longer wave, and that's what they call the 12th strand. Actually, more specifically, my cursor works. I don't think you can see it though. But if you take a cube and you tilt it 32 degrees, and we had a picture earlier, and then you rotate and blink 5 times, you have a pentadodecahedron, which is there on top, pentagonal dodeca, right? You take the pentadodeca and you step it down a helix, a slinky, by actually golden ratio. The radius of the turn is golden ratio cubed. The horizontal increment of turn is golden ratio, golden mean squared, and the vertical increment of turn is golden mean in the radian measure, and that's from Anting and Coxeter's famous paper showing this. We'll see a picture in a minute, entitled Geometric Extensions of Consciousness, and I want to credit Ann Ting for that because I worked with her in Philadelphia. Anyway, so that creates a helical slinky, which is the thread. So that's the first dimension. But remember, that helical slinky now, I've got 3 dimensions in the cube, call it 3, and then you tilt the cube up, and now that's the 4th axis spin. So I say the dodecahedron is 4D. I say. That's my opinion. Because I have precisely the 4th dimension of superposed spin. I literally superposed another axis spin on a cube. And that's the first place golden ratio shows. So I say the dodeca is a pretty good model of the hypercube 4D, and we'll have infinite discussions about that with Vincent. So now you take that 4D dodeca, pentodeca, ratchet down a helix, and that is the 5th axis of spin. So in my view, the thread that is DNA is 5D, actually, and literally, because I have 5 axes of spin superposed, shows up in the power spectrum. Now, if I take that thread and I braid the braid of the braid on the braid 7 times, the plot thickens, it becomes toroidal and circular. I sent you the circular DNA paper by Beaglestein. I should show you that. Actually, yeah, it's called The Ring in DNA, and this is the original article, Ring in DNA, goldenmean.info/circular DNA, and here's the same pictures we're looking at now. There's the DNA photomicrograph in a torus right there, and there's the picture from Lord of the Ring, for that reason. And this is the paper by Ken Beaglestein, DNA is not a double helix. And you see here, he does what you did, actually. If you model the recursion of the braid, you get recursive enough, suddenly the DNA is a torus. And he does the mathematics and the graphics, and so I think that might be fun for you, Glenn.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Ken might remember me. We had many conversations. So the circular DNA, so that fits the pictorial sequence here. So picking up there where we left off, the last point to be made about this slide is, notice that each rung of the ladder of DNA, as Glenn well pointed, at the center of that rung is a hydrogen bond. That's an H bond right here. These are H bonds, hydrogen, right there, center of the ladder. That's the implosive lightning bolt zipper. And then adjacent to that is a hex here, and then adjacent to that, guanine, thymine, is the pent. So every rung of the ladder is pent, hex, golden ratio rectangle, hex, pent. That's the rung, one ladder rung of the DNA. And my friend Gus Tricacci, who personally introduced me to Bucky Fuller, that was a top-down view of his house. And indeed, in the pent, it was a place where you could, good sharing, and the hex is a place you could have secrets. It was very functional, okay? And the golden rectangle was a spark gap.
So that nonlinear hydrogen bond he's talking about has quantum properties. It exhibits
Exactly.
Quantum jumping, I guess you call it.
Yes. Well, we say it's profoundly fractal and phase conjugate.
Right.
And in fact, it was me who wrote the equation to prove the radii of hydrogen are golden ratio electron shells to Planck. So that's clearly proof that it's fractal. So, and then this is you saw the movie, we played that a minute ago, you got that already. So that's the walking down the ladder. And then here, this was supposed to model, see, that's the short wave, the braid, and now that's the envelope on the braid. And I did this from an acoustic sampler, actually. And that's the wave on the wave, and now I have the wave on the wave on the wave. There's an envelope of envelopes there. Do you see that? So that's the first and the second and the third superposed spin rotation model geometrically.
That's Braden, what we just saw.
No, that's me.
Oh.
Greg Braden doesn't know the meaning of braiding, I don't think. He thinks the Schumann resonance is increasing. Poor guy, I love him, but anyway, that's another story.
So, Dan, why does it stop at 7?
No, I'm sorry, that's braiding. It's not Braden. Braiding. Braiding.
We were watching Braden.
I'm sorry.
Right.
I thought you said Greg Braden. Sorry. Please, your question.
Why does it stop at 7? You said it braids only 7 times.
Well, a couple of reasons. When they said there's 12 strands in your DNA, what they meant was you completed that process until it became a torus. And that happens specifically when you've got the 5 spins in the thread, and then you braid the braid of the braid on the braid 7 times. And the reason it's only 7 times is because you read Jane Roberts' book, Education of Oversoul 7. No, it's because there are exactly 7 axes of spin symmetry in a tetrahedron, which is the reason why the heart muscle, the Anu, and the heart of the sun, and the origin of Hebrew all have that same symmetry. 7 axis tetra. So basically, that's when you have 12. You see? 7 outside, 5 inside. And if later we'll look at the picture of the Anu, which was a clairvoyant sees when they look precisely, and this has been proven in physics now, they look at the subatomic hydrogen, look at the human heart, and they look at the heart of the sun, they see the same thing. They see the heart of DNA. They said 5 spins inside, 7 spins outside. They call it the Anu. We have pictures here in a minute. So that's why there's 7. It's a very specific reason, actually. And the reason there's 7 branches to your soul and soul memory, Jane Roberts did pretty well with Education of Oversoul 7. Anyway, so these are the harmonics, and notice it looks like a caduceus. Here's a caduceus in the EKG, moment of love. Here's a caduceus in the EEG, moment of love. And that was the caduceus model. Again, the caduceus, pine cones kissing noses. These are old slides. Glenn Ryan referred nicely to this. This is the book by Arthur T. Winfrey, When Time Breaks Down, the Geometric Origins of Cardiac Arrhythmia. very technical, but the pictures are fabulous.
Exactly.
And the pictures are only this. When your little child comes to you and says, "Where does my heartbeat come from?" you hand them the book. No, maybe they're not ready. So what you do is you explain, when a donut implodes inside a donut and recursively turns inside out, this is where you're supposed to say, "I would turn myself inside out for you, darling," is because the electric field around your heart profoundly dimples right there. And when that dimple happens, which is the physics of birthing called invagination, and the paper in the biodynamics literature is called the 7 stages of invagination for the same reason. We have animations, maybe it might be in this series. But anyway, the point is it really sucks. I mean, it turns inside out, and it creates suction, you see. And so this is the process of perfect recursive embedding called love. Lo-fi, long wave phi ratio. And so then each time this donut turns inside out again recursively, the electric field around your heart gets bigger. And another harmonic shows up in the power spectra of your EKG, which is the work I pioneered here. So, and this is the same perfect embedding, perfect nesting, embeddability. It's not Playboy magazine. And this was, you were trying to understand, you had a little clairvoyance, you were watching the Peruvian shaman steer a tornado, and the first thing you saw was the bioplasmic streamers from the shaman's belly embedding the tornado. You asked the shaman, again this is an old story, so we've told these stories a few too many times, but for fun. You asked the shaman, "Well, what are you doing?" And the shaman says, "I'm eating the hoocha of the tornado," not the tomato, the tornado. And you say, "Well, what's hoocha?" He says, "The anger." You're eating the anger of the, oh, interesting. You're feeling the pain. Yeah, I'm feeling the pain. How does tornado feel pain? Well, pain is defined by where charge bleeds due to fractality broken. You can write that down, actually. Pain exists where charge bleeds due to fractality broken, actually. So restoring compression is always the opposite of pain electrically, which is why Theraphi is so good with pain. We're fabulous. Pain, we can often. But it's obvious, if you restore electrical compression, it's the electrical opposite of pain by definition, which is also why we're so good with swelling. So anyway, for example, a tornado that passes over a metal trailer park bleeds charge and feels pain, okay? So that's an example of a tornado feeling pain. Whereas if a tornado passes over a sacred stone circle, that tornado is happy because it can get more centripetal. Okay, so the shaman is eating the pain of the tornado, and if you were standing there watching the bioplasmic streamers leave the belly of the shaman and embed in the center of that tornado, that's what it would look like. That's called embeddability. And in fact, the moment at which the plasma field of the shaman is perfectly embedded in the tornado says, "Oh, I love you because you feel my pain better than I feel my own." That's another good bumper sticker. And so then the tornado trusts the shaman to steer. And that's called becoming the center of gravity. And so at that point, then, the embeddability is completed. Now you see the shaman's aura has inhabited the tornado, and then you get the flavor. It's better than Walt Disney's Sorcerer's Apprentice, because he didn't really quite get it how to do it right. In fact, I think he screwed up at the end, if you remember Mozart and Sorcerer's Apprentice. That's called embeddability. This is another good graphic of the recursive braiding here on the right. We have lots of visuals. We have some nice braiding graphics. So now, let's understand exactly why that is a model of going into the next dimension. This is called the magnetic X generation. When I was young, you were part of the X generation, and you thought that meant that you were young. Now it means that you're old. But this is called the magnetic X. And so where the recursive DNA braids, it thickens. The plot thickens, as it were, and eventually it thickens enough to become toroidal, and that's what Glenn Ryan was speaking of. And we have some pretty fun graphs. And this enters into recursion in Celtic knot theory, which is very sacred, and the physics of Tantra. Okay. So did we finish? Oh, yeah. And then this is called pelastration. I don't know if you looked at this, Glenn, but where the reason the DNA turns inside out then is because it dimples and pelastrates and non-destructively self-re-enters. Torus becomes a Klein bottle, or however you want to model it. So that pelastration is actually visually graphed here. So the DNA has to do this before it can finish turning inside out, which is a biologic model relating to the Klein bottle, which is sort of an extension of the Mobius, called pelastration. There's beautiful graphics on this, and it's Dirk Lorenzens. We should credit him. There's his website.
And what triggers that?
Well, our model is massive phonon phase coherent, phase conjugate, broad spectral, implosive, harmonic cascades, something like Therify or Bliss, ideally, or Kundalini.
Yeah.
Actually, yes. And we know how to measure Kundalini in the microwave now. So, and so here is again circular DNA, toroidal. Again, these. And then we model this with. Where's our dancer from last night? Are you here? She's not here. It's too bad because. Okay. But anyway, we actually use Sufi dance, the dervish turn, to model some of these things. And this is, again, the 7 colors, 7 muscle layers, acceleration, gravity. So this is the fundamental golden ratio geometry in DNA itself, even to height to width ratio in DNA, again, golden ratio from the conventional physics literature. And so then that's good. That sets up this vortex. This is what we're talking about. So when this vortex happens, the long wave is embedded in the short, the DNA has become toroidal, and I got this going on right in the DNA. And so I've got all these massive vortices in the DNA, and that you can say is coherent, and that's called Lord of the Ring. And the letters on the side of the ring donut from Tolkien actually are Ugaro, Finnish and Hungarian, actually. And this is getting to another story, but if you wanted to find those who could read the Draco script on the cave walls in, I think it's where's the pyramids in China, the famous pyramids? Chen. Anyway, the pyramids there, there's cave wall carvings, and it's straight Draco script. And they found somebody who could read straight Draco in its old Hungarian called Rovás Írás. And so the old Hungarians actually were speaking straight Draco, we think. But anyway, that becomes many other stories. And so that the matrix of the names of God are here. That's Yahweh, and you see how it creates that matrix, which is the vortex, because Yod-He, Vav-He is actually that series of cones. And the toroid of DNA has the tetrahedral symmetry, which are the pairs of codons. There, animation on the top of right. Top-down view. So, what you begin to get a sense of, as your DNA becomes massively long-wave coherent, called Ride the Long Wave, Uncle Joe, if you believe Jose Argoyes, then that's related to the idea of going to the next dimension in the sense that the plasma density around your body becomes negentropic, self-aware, and massively centripetal to the point to which your aura is a massive plasma steering device, to the point eventually where you will steer stars, and you must. But the practical examples locally, if you read Kundalini Psychosis of Transcendence by my friend Lee Sanella, he said that Kundalini in Iceland was called the Great Mass of God. And why? Because from a distance, if you had clairvoyance, you see this Kundalini massively. And if you ever did any of our Ophanum rituals, we were steering tornadoes the size of continents, quite often, actually. And this is the scale to which your aura must become centripetal, or you didn't graduate from kindergarten. That's what it appears. And so this process of becoming plasma dense, and therefore more negentropic, is illustrated beautifully by the sun. Before I go there, there was a spot in my notes I was supposed to mention. Remind the symmetry of the chlorophyll molecule to the hemoglobin. It's the same thing. I think it's a magnesium at the middle. That's all. They unplug one atom, plug in another, and it changed from chlorophyll to hemoglobin. Now we know the chlorophyll, if you looked at the cover of my book and see the exact frequencies of photosynthesis, there's only 2, is a massively phase conjugate implosive negentropic. In other words, charge implosion is how photosynthesis works. Well, guess what? Hemoglobin in your blood is doing the same thing. Oh, I think the center was iron.
Hemoglobin, magnesium, and chlorophyll.
Magnesium. Okay, that's right. Magnesium, chlorophyll. Thank you. And iron. Yes. Okay, great. Because that's going to move us to our story, which is when Enki got here and started to do his cloning. Remember, his other name was Nudimmud, or Osiris. Nudimmud means the cloner. That was his task. He was trained. It's like, somebody washes dishes, somebody else does the cloning. Well, his job was to do the cloning. That's what he was here for. And when he was doing the cloning, the reason they then called us Takadama, Tak means Orion, Mintaka, and Magzitak. And Adama is the Hebrew root Adom, meaning red. So he called us the red man because he was fascinated with the geometry of that iron bond in the blood, which he had not seen before. It is said that other species were more directly related to chlorophyll symmetry. We know the Draco had, we believe, they had a lipid oil blood and a phosphorus electron transport mechanism, and they breathed in mostly nitrogen, breathed out cyanogen, the dragon's breath, and that oxygen is a poison for the Draco mostly, and so is water. We know that for sure. So if you pump oxygen into your senate, you can have out some of the shapeshifters, actually. It's useful. And also you note that, McDonald's is the perfect place for Draco dinner because French fries and Coca-Cola with the phosphorus is just perfect for the metabolism of Draco blood. And also, that as you travel among many planets, you can observe whether the old bloodlines, the Draco, are winning. This is a simplification. Excuse the poetry of the simplification. Yeah, I'm simplifying. Okay, but as you're passing by a planet and you want to check if the Draco reptiles, and there's some good Dracos, so this we can't. But that's very important to say. Thank you. But that you want to see if the Draco are winning or the humanoids. Just check. If radiation is going up and oxygen's going down and moisture's going down, the Draco are winning on that planet, okay? It's called Dune. And the reason is because not only is oxygen a poison, but you need to understand why water is a poison to them, actually. They came from a methane planet. Methane was their water. So that's why they need to stop at McDonald's, actually. But anyway, this was called the Orion Wars. The other thing you need to know is that on their home star, there was a slight increase in radioactivity. And low-level radioactivity, as we know from the, I think it's called the Brown radioactive battery. What's the radioactive battery? Damn. The low-level radioactivity triggers a electron cascade, which is quasi-superconductive, potentially, in certain materials. So there's a very famous nuclear battery that's a zero-point energy device that uses low radioactivity. Well, this was a bliss inducer on their home star, actually. Low-level radioactivity is great if you're a Draco, man. And there's a couple, it's called, you look it up on the web. Actually, if you read, the article I'm speaking about now is about my theory of extraterrestrial DNA. The huge article is called fractalfield.com/fusion in the blood. And that article has this whole story with graphics that I don't have time for right now. But anyway, and there you read about this couple that were born too close to Chernobyl. And they metabolize, and radioactivity is a stimulant for them, actually. They came to it's called the Iradia couple. And they were actually declared illegal by the Russian government for a while because they couldn't understand their DNA. They morphed back to, they time reversed. So anyway, this concept of understanding our relationship to some of the extraterrestrial politics in terms of how we can be empowered is the theme of this lecture. So now, at this moment in this lecture, we go to something even more controversial. Could that be more? Can we step on anybody else's toes that we've forgotten to so far? Okay. Is there anybody we have an insight? It's God. Oh yeah. Okay. We want to insult all religions equally. Okay. So we don't want to start any wars here. No. That's right. So to try to insult all governments equally. We want to go to the ET politics side of this now. There is a fella named Jason Rice who is famous at Gaia TV, whom I like very much. Now, my friend Jay Weidner, who was the narrator for most of that series, had just produced a major series that says that David Wilcock got in a lot of trouble because I think he was naive. He got it right about the blue spheres, but I don't think he knew. You said he doesn't know they're Andromedan. But the blue spheres are the large Andromedan ships, and they're wonderful. But he didn't call the blue spheres Andromedan. So with David Wilcock is this guy Corey Goode, which unfortunately the latest films from Jay Weidner said Corey Goode is big trouble. He's excited a lot of people. I don't really have an opinion personally, but he said it's become a bit of a cult. And I don't know. But what I do know is that it appears that David Wilcock, sadly, is naive in terms of physics. And I'm here to make a gentle comment about that.
Not a physicist.
That's how the problem starts. If you're not a physicist, you're not important. I'm glad we sorted that out. Okay. Okay. So, but no, I mean, David Wilcock gets on Discovery Channel, no, Ancient Aliens channel about like 20 times to analyze the Vimana and the Nazi Bell. Okay, fine, if you want to have the conversation, okay. And it took them about 12 episodes before they finally... It's like, watching David Wilcock do that was like watching the film The Gods Must Be Crazy, in which the Aboriginals see a Coke bottle fall from an airplane, and it takes them days and days to haul that Coke bottle back to the airplane. And then they finally, after researching why the Coke bottle fell, they said, the gods must be crazy. So that's the level of physics we got from David Wilcock, which I don't think was very helpful. Finally they admit, well, we think it was a Mercury vortex. Now they have a clue. They're getting a clue. Now, why am I telling you this now? And why do I think it's important? Well, because Jason Rice, who Jay Weidner and I both feel is right on the money, very solid. I recommend you watch his films at Guyette TV. Jason Rice, really. They did after they screwed up with poor David Wilcock and Corey Goode, they decided, we're going to do lie detector tests and polygraphs and psychological analysis before anybody else is getting on this show. It was funny. And so that's what they did to Jason Rice. He passes with flying colors, okay? So they do 12, 15 episodes with Jason Rice. And here is his story. Okay, well, the extraterrestrials abducted me for the off-Earth extraterrestrial army. It's hard to do a short version of this story, but it's a pretty messy story. But the important part of the story I want to tell you is when he was forced through the Nazi base in the South Pole. Okay? So what you need to know is the Nazis didn't lose, they won. And they took the Mercury vortex. They started with the literature of Vimana, and then they had a lady named Maria Orsic who looks Thank you. I'm allowed to say that. Thank you. Okay. So Maria Orsic was Pleiadian, and they convinced her to teach the Germans how to use a Mercury vortex. Fine. And they noticed it had radioactive properties, et cetera, et cetera. Now, and that became what they call the Haunebu, the Nazi Bell, which is probably what crashed at Kecksburg, which is another story that they did analyze well on TV. But what we're here to learn is the physics. Why would a Mercury vortex produce propulsion? Well, remember, Bill Donovan, and all of this on the physics of propulsion is fractalfield.com/propulsion. You can read all our shtick on this. So Bill Donovan, who was our partner for many years, and he's still around, wonderful, and wrote the book on the Minkowski frost, which was 800 times its own weight in propulsion if you stimulate a quartz piezo with an RF conjugate pump wave. So this is obviously what they called warp power. And Minkowski frost is that. And the book is at fractalfield.com/propulsion. Very detailed. So now we know exactly, and I do mean exactly, the physics of what Scotty meant was when he said, we're shifting from impulse power to warp power, Captain. We know exactly the physics. I mean precisely. There's no ambiguity. The impulse power was, like a Mercury vortex, Bill noticed that if the hydraulic pump in the big, like, weighs 5 tons, machine in the machine shop, the hydraulic pump, the hose going from the hydraulic pump happened to make a toroidal loop. And every time that hydraulic pump kicked in and pumped like 1,000 gallons in half a second, which is what it had to do, the whole machine would go bloop, boom, bloop, boom. And Bill's there like, I'm an electrical engineer. We ought to understand that. And so we bought a $1,000 pump to pump water in a torus, a vortex. And we did. And we made about 2 ounces. And then we got our consultant on the phone, who I can't tell you too much about, on the phone, says, oh, well, we did it with an aquarium pump. I said, oh? And you know what he used? A mercury vortex. But he said the mercury had to be doped with this iron powder, and there's a certain solvent they use to make it soluble in the mercury, and that chemistry might be proprietary. And it became a red liquid. Has anybody studied the Nazi Bell literature? The famous red liquid? Red mercury.
Did they add beryllium to that too?
I don't know. But we know it was red, and what that did, you see, was then the mercury not only had the highest level of inertia, which is what you need on the loop, but it also had the magnetic flux density. So now you got magnetic flux and inertial flux all in the same root, and you know what the root was? Perfect. We wrote the equations for actually to predict how to make the most propulsion. Is it complicated? No. There it is. It's the same spiral, the same donut. And so that was propulsion. So back to South Pole, so there they built the thing, and they kicked the tail out of Admiral Byrd. What's his name? Richard Byrd. And he goes down to the South Pole, and the American says, we're going to check to see if there's any Nazis down there. And Byrd comes back with his tail between his legs, having his butt kicked. And he says, we probably shouldn't go down there again. He said, they're going from the one end of the earth to the other in a few minutes, and we better not go there again. And so the U.S. government spends like decades trying to hide that. But hello, let's take our head out from under the sand and get honest about this. So Jason Rice explains that he was transported to one of the major Nazi bases, and it's a Nazi base. It's huge, on Ceres, the largest asteroid between Jupiter and Mars, I believe. And the Nazis run the place. And so this is bad news. Do you agree this is bad news? I'd say it's bad news. And so what is the human race doing? We're exporting Nazism. And why are we doing that? Because our local scientist does not know why an object falls to the ground. And I say that is a disease and we need to fix it. Would you help me do that?
Yes. Not only are we exporting science, we're exporting the people too.
Yeah, that's right. We're exporting the people. So we can get empowered. So here's the postscript. The postscript is that, I'm not saying that you should get engaged politically even until you realize the point of maximum leverage to do that. I am saying education is the mission, and educate your children. Probably the most important thing you can teach your children is the science, and I do mean science of how to have a bliss experience, actually. Because once you have access to a source of bliss, your aura is navigable. For the same reason that a beehive would not swarm unless there was royal blood present, because there's nothing to steer. So the plasma in your aura gets ready to propagate, called bliss or death or tantra. But to make that aura cocoon navigable, I recommend the books on lucid dreaming and the books on psychonavigation, which is how you steer a plasmoid in the longitudinal, actually. And you can recognize the onset of the skill to lucid dream where your aura gets more phase coherent. A good book on that is The 9 Faces of Christ, where the sequence of stages of lucid dreaming where first you can only see your lover, and the next time you can see and hear your lover. So you take more organs of perception with you in the lucid dream or death as your aura evolves in coherence. So that book, 9 Faces of Christ, is very helpful. The real practical issue here is the reason we don't recognize propulsion, in effect, is because our governments do not want us to be navigable. And I don't want to pick on governments, but you see, there is an inherent contradiction here, because once a group of people has bliss together regularly, which is illegal in almost every country on the planet, for a good reason, because once a group of people is having bliss together regularly, that aura cocoon is the only biologic definition of government, actually. So that's the reason we call it politics. And I've said this many times. The body polis is the name for the aura cocoon that results from bliss. Okay, body polis. So obviously, the physics of politics is defined, if you define human success as survival, then obviously the ability to have a bliss experience is the highest definition of survival, because it's the only way to get through death, for one thing. So the purpose of government is to teach bliss. From a physics perspective, that's not controversial. That's simple, actually. So you can explain that to Trump anytime you like for me. That'd be fine. Yeah. And so once you have a core group of people that regularly has bliss together, that aura cocoon is self-navigable. That is the definition of government, as it is the definition of politics, and the only way to take a group soul back through the sun, which is where we're destined to go and grow up. Every ancient religion is called a sun god religion for a very good reason. If your extraterrestrial came in a heavy metal craft, they're probably trouble. If they came in a plasma cocoon that came through the heart of the sun, they're interesting. and that's why ultimately the plasma... And so what I think, even Swaru, what she means by being 5D is being a coherent enough plasmoid that you become propagable and self-navigating, actually. And generally, that would be impossible where charge distribution is inefficient. Practically, that means our modern cities would be death to any evolved being of any kind, actually, for 100 reasons. The primary one being that charge distribution is inhibited. For the same reason that an elemental or an orb or a ghost is pretty much toast in a modern city, most every evolved extraterrestrial is also toast in a modern city, because charge distribution is not possible. So a sacred forest, yes. A modern city, no. So until we learn the definition of sacred architecture and sacred space, we don't have much possibility of evolving into the next dimension, or being 5D. And remember, what we mean by the rapture here is where we don't have the animations here right now, but where the interstellar flux lines embed in that superposed axis of spin, you know, the whole photon cloud model. But it's just the convergence of interstellar flux lines, what, who is it? Paul Laviolette called the stellar wave, the galactic wave. And it's basically a dust cloud, but what it does is creates a plasma convergence at a planet. And when that plasma implodes, you have what's conventionally called the rapture. And at that point, those who are angry and whose aura is not compressible, the same ones who couldn't beam me up Scotty, are in trouble, actually. So when the fundamentalists say prepare for the rapture, actually that's good physics. It is necessary to prepare. So another practical way to translate that is the more bliss kundalini you can withstand, the more ready you are. Okay. So, conversation, questions. I see it's 4:09. Yes, go ahead.
I have, in May, when we were talking back in Arturo in the Tucum's conference, I have shortly mentioned about human design system, which works basically on a personality crystal and design crystal and the magnetic monopole crystal. And at the moment of that, the design crystal and the magnetic monopole crystal just go back into the earth, and then they create this charge. So the personality crystal has, about 72 hours to go back to its fractal. So basically, it's what you are.
Implosion, yes. Charge implosion, yes.
In another language.
Yes, right.
But in human design, the body really has to be left alone so that the charge can really create that charge enough so that it can go back to its fractal. But when you talk about a successful death, what do you think about, you know, other mammals or humans interfering with the physical body? Because, you know, in almost all religions, they want to bury the dead. I mean, because it can create all kinds of
Yes.
problems when you have in this weather a dead body just sitting outside
Yes.
the garden when it's there.
But we did have the conversation yesterday about the physics of mummification and the Tibetan shrinking of the death. So it is true that if you take your aura and implode it, you can take more with you. It's really true. So the rituals of death and are electrically appropriate. And your comment about animals is relevant and interesting. The many spiritual traditions believe, I believe probably correctly, that many species of animals, they say the soul has not yet individuated, which is it's a group pod sort of thing. So for example, when Dorothy at Findhorn, whom I knew, said, well, I was having a conversation with a hive of bees, or she couldn't have that conversation with one bee, only the cloud of plasma of the hive, called the hive mind, quite literally. But the story is then one day a dog did something so totally unselfish to save its master at death that that dog's soul individuated in the next life. So the individuation of the soul from a group soul to individual. And that's acquisition of critical mass of centripetal inertial charge. Yeah. So have a soul means your plasma toroid is implosive, it's clear. And animals are beautifully intelligent, very high level, dolphins and whales. And whether they have a soul, I mean, certainly I think Star Trek 4 or 5 was right. If the whales stop singing, the long wave doesn't work. Our Earth grid as a longitudinal antenna is broken. Any other questions, comments? Thank you. Yes,
You dealt,
go ahead.
you dealt with the plasma leaving, the soul leaving. What about the plasma coming in? You know, like intelligent plasma entering the Earth's atmosphere as well.
Right, and well, the story I was told actually was Montauk was so fractionating to the Earth's aura that the Templars designed all kinds of rituals to try to fix the bleeding holes in the Earth aura. But in the meantime, more parasites arrived. This is William Buehler, called the Templar Agenda of the Repair of the Fabric of Time. I did the website goldenmean.info/Buehler, Buehler, probably the most sophisticated Templar literature on the planet. Of course, you would know. And so there's an example of plasma arriving at the planet where the planet as a collective membrane had become porous due to bad hygiene named Montauk and therefore needed fixing, more imploding. So many stories about that,
So
yes.
carry that through now when you go back to Damanhur and you go through to the syncretic lines and what they're bringing through.
The concept of synchronic lines is literally, obviously, a longitudinal array. They call them scalar. Technologically, they did some interest. They're doing great experiments with plants. I found knowledge of hygiene there was a bit limited. Actually, I've been there. I tried to teach there. We're not ready for physics. Lovely people trying to communicate. It's Templar memories reincarnated without physics. But they're trying. But they're sweet. But serious astral hygiene issues, in my personal experience. But the concept of a synchronic grid, right on, that's what a longitudinal grid is. Yes, absolutely.
Communicated with themselves once upon a time.
Yeah, and they're doing plant studies on plant communication, which is, Secret Life of Plants. Clave Baxter's wonderful work. Yes, are we running out of time, Roger, here, I think, huh? Are we?
Just a couple of minutes.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
You just saying to children, voices as well as this experience, for the children, that you can teach them. And you mentioned the lucid dreaming in the book. You call it,
I just got about 5 yogi books on lucid dreaming, and they're wonderful. I should have brought the titles. But the number of books out there that are good on lucid dreaming, they're not hard to find. But the practice is clear. You sleep at a regular time in a regular place. You douse the magnetic line where you sleep. You set your intention before you go to sleep. You rigorously keep a dream journal every morning, and you begin to find that the pattern of direction, of the theme of your dreams, and noting recurrent dreams, and eventually become aware in your dream. Classic, this is classic physics. How do you wake up inside a dream? Anybody know? Lots of ways, obviously. But classic, look at your hand. Now, why would looking at your hand wake you up in a dream? Understand the electrical engineering of this now. So, The size, in the homunculus, the fractal map of your whole body and the folded surface of your brain, what has the most space devoted to it?
Brain.
Your hand. The map of where neurons go from your body to your brain, the most space is allocated on the surface of your brain is your hand. Well, for obvious good reason. And so, when you look at your hand inside a dream and you're really focused there, you're closing a do loop. I'm going to spell that D-E-W since that's my initials, but you can spell it otherwise. But when you close the do loop, what happens is the knot tightens and the plot thickens and the inertia gets centripetal and you wake up in the dream.
Location
It's
is
good for
important.
children to learn this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that children should be learning, really.
There's a shortcut, there's a device where you zap your brain with 40 hertz for like 15 minutes before you go to sleep and you can lose
That,
40 hertz.
40 hertz is gamma. The right frequency of gamma, and there are gamma trainers, very good point. And let's do a little plug here, shall we, Patrick? Also, suggest you buy Patrick's iThrive, Patrick and Jan's iThrive.com, and not only to get an accelerometer on your bed to tell you when you turned over during the night, but it measures your heart rate variability to tell you whether you got access to the deep sleep, critical for lucid dreaming. And so the heart rate variability of sleep analysis, iThrive.com, very expensive. You don't need a hospital to do it. Remember that famous episode of Star Trek where the starship's counselor finds out the reason everybody on board is grouchy is suddenly in this part of the galaxy, nobody's getting deep sleep, and they couldn't dream, and so everybody got grouchy because their soul wasn't getting direction? So you can measure that. All you need is Patrick's genius.
Well, the simple one is to have a rubber band says, are you dreaming? So ask yourself that question during the day. Obviously, if you ask yourself that question during your sleep, you are dreaming.
Yeah, so there's lots of ways. But anything, like you could say, every time I'm going through that door sill, I'm going to check whether I'm dreaming or not. And that'll set a little tripwire, and eventually...
The geomancy of the location with the 7 fractal back in again.
That's right. And that's why the most important thing you need to do is make a magnetic map of your bed. Very important. Yeah, I mean, our friend Gary Skillen, he says, don't tell me who's sick in that house. I'll go make a magnetic map of everybody's bed, and now I'll tell you who's sick.
Or move to Prague.
Prague is where I lucid dream best. Prague. Well, Prague. Yes.
He knows very much about it and is teaching it.
Oh yeah, lucid dreaming. Oh, Tao Yoga and Qigong. Wan Li?
One is a friend who's living on Connaught Island.
Wan
He
Li.
has a lot of experience with lucid dreaming.
Teaching. Thank you.
He's teaching it.
Yes. So I hope you all feel inspired. Tomorrow's lecture is about vortex and water, theimploder.com, where we apply this practically. And we thank you for your attention. And let's all lucid dream together. Thank you. Thank you.